This video contains scenes that are gruesome. It may not be for all viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. This video is not for children. Welcome to Uncle Boogie Productions. Tonight, we venture into a dark and twisted chapter of Cleveland's history, an unsolved nightmare that still haunts the city to this day, a shadow that lingered through the 1930s, leaving behind a trail of grotesque violence and the chilling echoes of one of America's most elusive serial killers, the Cleveland torso murderer. It was a time when fear and mystery crept through the streets of Cleveland, 1930s Cleveland to be exact. A city ravaged by the Great Depression, a city where the poor and desperate fought for survival amidst the grimy underbelly of Kingsbury Run, known as the Roaring Third. This infamous area, populated by drifters, gamblers, and those cast aside by society, became the stage for unspeakable horrors that would leave a permanent stain on the city's soul. The torso murderer, a nameless figure of death, would strike with such brutal precision that his grisly work left the city reeling with fear, unable to find any peace. They called him the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, but his true identity was lost to time, to darkness, and to terror. 13 victims are officially attributed to this butcher's hands, but many believe the true count is much higher. With chilling cases dating from the 1920s all the way to 1950, it's impossible to say how many lives were claimed by this monster. The body of a woman, dubbed the Lady of the Lake, was found washed up on September 5, 1934. Her torso, mutilated beyond recognition, had an abdominal scar that hinted at a painful past, but the rest of her body was never recovered. Her head lost to the depths of Lake Erie. But the brutality didn't stop there. From 1935 to 1938, victims were found in various grotesque states, decapitated, dismembered, their bodies broken in ways that no human being should endure. The bodies were often discovered far from their original locations, further confusing investigators and deepening the mystery. Each victim's dismemberment was surgical in its precision. A killer who took pleasure in the act of mutilation, leaving his mark on Cleveland's streets. The torso murderer's most chilling hallmark was the way he dismembered his victims. Beheadings, torsos severed in half, limbs removed with terrifying skill, each crime scene like the aftermath of some twisted ritual. Bodies left to rot for weeks before being discovered, their flesh toughened by chemicals that preserved the horrors the killer had unleashed. As the murder spree continued, Cleveland's public safety director, Eliot Ness, yes, the same Eliot Ness who took down Al Capone, was called to investigate. He led raids into the depths of Kingsbury Run, hoping to find clues that would lead to the killer's identity. But every lead turned to dust. Even when he arrested a prime suspect, the butcher remained elusive, slipping through the law's grasp. And then he taunted them. In a bold, chilling act, the torso murderer left the remains of his victims in plain view of Eliot Ness's office. A macabre message, daring the lawman to stop him. This act, this terrifyingly arrogant act, cemented the murderer's infamy. By 1937, the killer had escalated once again. In July of that year, the severed torso of a man was found floating in a pool near East 37th Street, his identity unknown. His head, like so many before him, had vanished without a trace. What kind of mind could commit such horrors? What kind of man could dismember a body with such cold detachment? But the terror didn't stop there. On the 23rd of February 1937, a woman's torso, later known as Jane Doe the Fur, was discovered washed ashore at Euclid Beach. Her limbs and head were lost to the deep, but the horror of what had been done to her body remained in the knife marks across her skin. The coroner could offer no answers, only more questions. As the year progressed, the killings grew more brutal and more numerous. The victims were nameless, faceless, their identities wiped away as cleanly as their bodies. In April of 1938, Jane Doe III's severed leg surfaced in the Cuyahoga River, followed by her bisected torso a month later, wrapped in burlap. The murderer had become a ghost, leaving nothing but mutilated corpses in his wake. And yet, the shadows of these brutal deaths clung to Cleveland, casting a long and terrible pall over the city. Despite efforts from Ness and his team, including harrowing raids and the burning of entire shanty towns, the killer remained one step ahead, evading justice at every turn. The public was in terror. The media couldn't get enough of the grisly details, feeding the flames of fear that had spread throughout the city. And then, in a terrifying twist, a letter arrived in 1938. A letter that claimed to come from the torso murderer himself. The writer boasted of his crimes, even alluding to murders in California, and suggesting ties to the infamous Black Dahlia case. The killer seemed untouchable, invincible. His madness seemed boundless, his cruelty endless. The investigation turned its focus to two prime suspects, Frank Dolezal and Dr. Francis Sweeney. Dolezal died mysteriously while in custody, his death shrouded in suspicion. Dr. Sweeney, a war veteran with a dark past, was also questioned. But despite his eerie proximity to the crimes, there was no solid evidence linking him to the murders. His life, marred by alcoholism and personal turmoil, created a web of confusion that left authorities grasping at straws. But the terror didn't end with the investigation. Postcards, taunting letters, and mysterious threats haunted the families of the victims, and Eliot Ness himself, until Sweeney's death in 1964. And as we stand here, in the shadow of these horrific events, the question remains: who was the Cleveland torso murderer? Was he a lone, sadistic killer, or were there others involved? And what dark, twisted legacy has he left behind in the very soul of Cleveland? This story isn't over. It echoes through time, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the shadows. A story that will never be forgotten. Join us next time as we continue our journey into the heart of darkness and uncover more horrors that lurk in the shadows. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to Uncle Boogie Productions. Stay tuned for more chilling tales from the past.